Senator, we're live.
All right, great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It is Friday, December 9th, and this is a subcommittee meeting of the Solid Waste Management Task Force. We are the Diversion, Reduce, Reuse, and Recycle subgroup of that task force, and I'm really excited to be having our first meeting today. We're a little bit light on membership this morning. Folks are coming in from different meetings, so we'll see. I've had a couple texts this morning that they're going to be popping in as soon as they finish with other things. But we do have some folks here, and maybe we could just take a quick minute. We probably have a membership of about 10 who are joining this subgroup, in addition to the state officials who are part of the working group. But I don't know, I'll just quickly go around and then, we can introduce folks at other points when they join us. But Frank, you're on my screen first as a member, if you want to just introduce yourself.
Lucky me. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
Frank M. Antonacci, Chief Operating Officer at Murphy Road Recycling. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Frank. And Seth, I see you on my screen.
Yeah, hi, Seth Baylor with Oak Ridge Dairy Farm and Dairy Farm in Ellington, Connecticut.
Great to have you with us, Seth. And Jen, can you introduce yourself? She may be balancing meetings right now. All right, and then we've got lots of folks from DEEP. So, Jen, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sorry, I'm multitasking, as you had pointed out. I apologize. This is Jen Heaton-Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Housatonic Resources Recovery Authority. I represent 14 municipalities in Western Connecticut. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And like I said, we have several others, members of this subgroup, like Brian Piagentini of Quantum Biopower, as well as Jamie Cosgrove, who represents Bristol Resource Recovery as a board member there, Joan Nichols of the Connecticut Farm Bureau, Pat Grasso of Urban Mining, and a couple of other at-large members. And again, as we move through this process, we'll have time to introduce ourselves. But let's dive right in. Today, I thought we could ask the DEP to do an overview for us of, we've been really hyper-focused on solid waste management over the past few years, actually many years, but I've been, in my short tenure as Senate Chair of the Environment Committee, it's something that has become of great concern with MIRA's shutdown. And at the time when I came in, MIRA was a bit incapacitated and now is closed. And we have to figure out what we are going to be doing, what the future is of solid waste management in the state of Connecticut, and, working hard with our partners at DEP, as well as municipal partners, haulers, all of the folks across the state who are involved, stakeholders, who are involved in this. And so we think we've got a good representative group here, and want to learn more about the state of things so that we can figure out how best to move forward. Obviously, anaerobic digesters, on-farm digesters, a big piece of this as well. And so, just really want to hear more from DEEP today. So glad to have you here, Commissioner, and other folks on here. I see lots of DEEP folks here with us today. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, and to all the task force members of this subgroup who are joined this morning. I'm just thrilled to be part of this discussion, particularly on the diversion and source reduction aspects of a solution. And I briefly want to recognize some of the members of our DEEP team who have joined today. James Albus will be actually presenting for DEEP, and I apologize because I'm double booked this morning, so I'll be having to log off in about 20 minutes to go to a different meeting, but James will be providing that presentation. Jen Perry is our bureau chief for materials management and compliance assurance, and she's here as well as Gabby Fregon and Brenna Toman, and I believe Harrison Nance is on as well from DEEP. So this is, as you can tell from the numbers of DEEP participation, this particular aspect of our waste solutions is critical importance to DEEP. And I'll also note it's not just a policy priority for our agency, but it's actually the law of the state of Connecticut. We're proud that the General Assembly has adopted legislation years ago that committed to the state to not only prioritizing self-sufficiency in how we manage municipal solid waste, but also adopting a waste hierarchy that prioritizes source reduction above everything else, and then recycling and diversion ahead of disposal options like waste to energy and landfilling. And I know that we've been delighted to be part of a lot of the different subgroup discussions that have focused more on those solutions that are at the bottom of the least preferred options of the waste hierarchy, particularly around financing and looking for ways to support waste to energy facilities in the state. I know, but I think it's really, really critical that the insights from this subgroup are given priority, given that these options for recycling and diversion are by statute should be prioritized in trying to address waste disposal solutions. So we have a lot to share here, and I'll turn it over to James to kick things off. But I appreciate the opportunity, to be part of this discussion.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to share my screen to utilize a PowerPoint that we put together for today. So, Senator, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting us to talk to the group today. We really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion and go through some of the high-level data that the state collects to help everyone on this call better understand the current status of materials management in Connecticut. Again, my name is James Albus. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning for the Bureau of Materials Management and Compliance Assurance. So my office does manage the solid waste database for the state, and shout out to Brenna Toman, who's a new DEEP hire who came on a couple months ago to be the data lead for my group. And she's done a fantastic job and helped put together a lot of the material that you will see today. We also manage many of the state's extended producer responsibility programs, including mattresses, paint, mercury thermostats, and we provide high-level support to the Bureau in terms of policy and legislative action. So a little bit about my group and what we do. So just a quick introduction here. The purpose of this presentation is to be informational. Again, we want to ensure that the committee has the best and most up-to-date information on the materials management sector. The data you will see here today is basically through the 2021 calendar year. So we're obviously still collecting 2022 data and probably won't have a full picture of 2022 data for some time. But what you see here today will be generally through the 2021 calendar year. Data comes to us from facilities that report to DEEP as required by regulations and reflected in permit requirements. We have some additional data, and that is sourced. And just to note, especially that a complete understanding of the impact of MIRA's decision to cease waste to energy operations at their facility in July will not be known for quite some time, but we can certainly make some reasonable high-level assumptions that can assist with policymaking. And again, part of the disclaimer aspect of this presentation, there are obviously limitations to the data. First of all, it's only as good as what's reported to us. And I mean a couple of things by that. First of all, a lot of the data is inputted both by the facility and by our team by hand. So human error is a possibility, and we do our best to quality control for that. We don't always notice it right away, but when we notice something, we try to rectify it as soon as we can. But that is certainly a possibility. And also the numbers that we get don't always tell the full story, as you probably well know when it comes to data. So we're presenting the numbers. We do have some narrative to back up some of the numbers that you will see, but the full story is not always, it doesn't always appear in the numbers on the screen. Secondly, we don't have good data on bottle mill material that is redeemed, and that's because that's not collected by the state. What we do collect is information on the number of bottles sold in the state and the amount of SGs that the state receives. So we can use that data to make some assumptions about bottle bill material that's recycled, but what we don't know are the types of materials that go through the bottle bill system, what the amount of glass versus plastic versus aluminum, and we don't know the numbers of each of those units. So I just want to point out that that's sort of a gap in the data that we collect. So we've done our best to make assumptions based on some materials flow analyses that were done several years ago. But again, we don't have specific data on the bottle bill, and that makes it a little hard to predict how the upcoming changes to the bottle bill will affect the materials management system. And again, the mirror closure is not yet reflected in available data because our data goes through 2021 and the closure did not occur until July of 2022. And lastly, the data doesn't capture some aspects of the materials management sector, such as backyard composting, textile drop-off at donation centers, and other activities. So first, I wanted to start with just a high-level picture of MSW disposal. So this graph depicts MSW that is disposed either at a resource recovery facility, also known as waste to energy facilities, whether it be in-state or out-of-state, or a landfill. And Connecticut has no active landfills for MSW. So any landfill, any waste that ends up in a landfill is ending up at an out-of-state landfill that's depicted here. As you can see, the total generation of Connecticut MSW has remained relatively constant, somewhere in the 2.2 to 2.3 million tons per year range. It fluctuates year to year, sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down, but that's essentially where we've been for the last 10 years. This is another way to look at this data. This graph shows the tons that are going to resource recovery facilities and the tons that are being exported, whether they're exported either to a landfill or to an out-of-state RRF. A couple of things I want to point out about this graph. First of all, 2015, we realized the Wallingford RRF closure. So you'll see a slight increase in the tons exported in 2015 and a concomitant reduction in the tons managed at an RRF in state. And that a closure has obviously continued to affect the landscape after 2015. And secondly, the rather large increase that you'll note in 2018 and 2019 in exports was due to the extended Mira outage, where both of the turbines failed at the same time, and Mira municipalities were ending up sending a lot of that waste out of state. And as you can see in 2020 and 2021, the numbers have still been fairly large in terms of exports. Now, this chart is specific to the exports. It charts out-of-state landfilling versus out-of-state resource recovery facility. And the trend very clearly over the last several years is that much of the waste has been landfilled rather than going to RRF facilities. Now, these landfills, they're located in several states. I would say that on average, most of it's going to landfills in Ohio. We also utilize landfills in Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and other states. And here's yet another way to look at the MSW disposal. This chart depicts the resource recovery facilities within Connecticut. Again, this is just showing Connecticut generated MSW. These facilities do take a small amount of out-of-state waste as well. This chart is just talking about Connecticut MSW. And I think the most stark thing you can see from this graph is the decline in the number of tons managed at the Mira facility since 2016 and the associated rise in exports. You'll also note a small dip in the Preston facility over the last 2 years. That's in part due to the fact that Preston has taken a little more out-of-state waste than normal. We also did reach out to them directly after seeing this data, and they have had some furnace issues that they've been working through, and it's expected that they will be managing a lower amount of waste going forward, not significantly lower. And I just want to note that the decline here is kind of exacerbated by the additional out-of-state waste that they have taken. So the overall decline in their tons managed has not declined by as much as might be implied here. So these charts are from the 2015 waste characterization study that the state of Connecticut did. And what a waste characterization study is essentially an audit of what is in various waste streams. So I focused on MSW in particular, since that's probably of greatest import to today's discussion. The chart on the left, the pie chart, is MSW composition. So this was taken from auditing loads that are deposited at resource recovery facilities and transfer stations. What you can see here is that the bulk of what is in our trash is food waste and paper. Those are the two biggest categories. There are also a number of other categories. The tonnages that you see here, you'll see, for example, paper is 539,493 tons. Those are from 2015 when the study was taken. So those don't necessarily correlate to 2021 data. And on the right, this pie chart shows the recoverability of the disposed waste that's in existing MSW collection sites. So what this chart tells you is that there are a lot of compostable organics that can be recycled, and that includes food scraps. There are also a lot of recyclable materials that do end up in the waste stream. And the other big chunk is items that are not currently recoverable in a curbside collection program at 41%. Now, those items, some of them, certainly cannot be recycled. Some of them potentially could be if programs were in place to source separate them. For example, electronics end up in that category, and if electronics are taken to an e-waste drop-off location in your municipality, they can clearly be recycled. So that piece of the pie, I don't want you to assume that none of it can be recycled. Some of it can, and certainly if there were to be new technologies or new programs in place that could manage, for example, plastic films, that number would be reduced. And just a note on the 2015 waste characterization study, you might be thinking that 2015 was a long time ago, particularly in the context of a global pandemic that has been occurring over the last 2.5 years. We feel pretty confident that these numbers at a high level are still representative of the waste stream, and we could certainly use these numbers to help guide policy going forward. The 2015 waste characterization study was very similar to the 2010 waste characterization study that the state went through. And there has been one state in the country that's done a waste characterization study since the start of the pandemic. That is the state of Wisconsin. They conducted a waste characterization study in 3 months in 2020 and 3 months in 2021. And what they found are frankly very similar results to our 2015 study. And their report even suggested that their 2020 and 2021 numbers were consistent with their most recent waste characterization study that was done in 2009. So I think it's fair to say, again, that these numbers are useful when making high-level policy direction. Okay, there's a lot going on in this chart. If you look at the left bar, that shows where MSW was going in the state in 2021. So the various resource recovery facilities, including MIRA, and the green bar is exports. The middle is the waste stream components related to the left pie chart from the previous slide. This is broken out based on the 2021 MSW total. So the numbers of tonnage for tonnage is different than what you saw in the previous slide, but it's reflective of the 2021 total. And on the right, again, it's the pie chart on the right from the last slide, translated to 2021 numbers. So again, want to point out a couple things. First of all, food scraps is a big portion of the waste in 2021 still, and it roughly compares to the amount of MSW that the MIRA facility managed in 2021. So I think that's an important point to note. And again, if those food scraps are source separated, they can be managed and recycled or composted. And secondly, again, this big piece of the pie, I don't want to belabor the points I made on the last slide, but again, these are items that some of which cannot be recycled, some of which could be if the right programs were in place. So there are significant pieces here to draw from to make improvements in diversion and recycling. This chart looks at single stream recycling for the last several years, and I apologize for not having 2021 data yet on this slide. I took this from a prior presentation I'd done. So it's 2016 through 2020. What you're seeing here, the blue bars are the total WIWO. That stands for what's in, what's out materials. Those are the materials that are accepted on a universal basis in the blue bin. So the blue bar is total WIWO material received at MRFs. The orange bars are total WIWO marketed. That means that the materials were baled and sold to a secondary processor or broker or other entity that would intend to recycle that material. The gray bar is estimated recoverable single stream recyclables in the MSW stream. Again, that's based on the waste characterization study and that right pie chart that indicated there was still some recyclable material left in the waste stream. And the yellow line is an estimate of the percent of WIWO material in the MSW stream and recycling stream that is actually recovered. So as you can see, unfortunately, that has been trending downward. I would caution, though, that this number may not be entirely accurate for a few reasons. First of all, if a material is marketed to a broker, we know that it is marketed to that broker, but we don't know where it goes after that. And it's not possible at this point in time for DEEP to verify that that material was actually recycled. Secondly, just the general data limitations of, the data is only as good as what we get. So we know that, there may be some variation in these actual numbers. And of course, the bottle bill is not reflected in these numbers. So, there are factors that could drive the actual percentage higher or lower. So it's really hard to say, at a high level of accuracy that this number is correct, but I think it tells an important picture. That, first of all, there is improvement to be made in terms of single stream recycling. First of all, making sure that those materials that are currently in the gray bars can make them into the blue bars. But also, you could see in 2018, 2019, and 2020 that there were fewer materials marketed as compared to materials received, and that could be due to global factors such as the Chinese sword policy. So it's just a few things to consider with this slide. Okay, there's a lot on this chart, but I want to explain what you should be looking at in terms of the most important information. This chart shows the actual numbers from 2021 versus a hypothetical scenario with no MIRA RRF, and this gives us kind of a picture into the future without now knowing that the facility is closed and obviously next year will be the first full year of closure. So looking at the items highlighted in yellow in the right two columns, this is, I think, the most important piece of this chart. It shows that out-of-state disposal will significantly increase, and we're assuming that essentially 100% of the MIRA tonnage will be going out of state, and I'll explain why in future slides. But the numbers, the estimated numbers where you see asterisks are based on 2021 MSW disposal rates and how much export was going to landfill versus RRF. But you can see the total exported jumps from 373,000 tons per year to 862. So that's a significant increase. It leaves a lot of waste, when we're thinking about the state's desire to be self-sufficient and the requirements in statute for us to be self-sufficient. This creates quite a big deficit. And you could see on the bottom row of the chart, the self-sufficiency deficit, we were already at 17% in 2021 under the actual numbers. We would be 40% in a hypothetical scenario without the MIRA facility. And here is the reason why we believe that essentially 100% of those tons will be going out of state. This chart shows the actual tonnage combusted at each remaining RRF in the state versus their permanent disposal capacity. So if you look at the bottom four, Deep believes that each RRF has a practical disposal capacity of about 85% of their permanent capacity. That was outlined in our 2016 CMMS. As you can see, all of the facilities are either at or very close to that 85% practical capacity. So there is little to no room for the existing facilities to take additional waste without displacing MSW that they are already managing. And at the top, just for comparison's sake, the very top line is the 2021 actual MIRA managed tonnage plus what was exported out of state. You can see as it compares to even if we were to say, okay, RRFs take 100% of what you're permitted for, there would still be an incredibly significant gap. And just for reference, the MIRA permitted capacity of just shy of 800,000 tons is also reflected here. And I think it's also important to note that the remaining RRFs in Connecticut are aging as well. They were all, the permits to construct were released in the mid to late 80s and early 90s. So these are very old facilities. Obviously, the MIRA facility was a unique one because that had been used for power generation in various forms since the 1920s. So that had a much longer lifespan than the others, but the other facilities are still upwards of 30 or more years old. So we are, at a point where these facilities are also aging, and it's something that we should be considering as we're moving forward. Looking at out-of-state capacity in the Northeast, the projected landfill capacity is expected to significantly decrease between now and the year 2050. While we send very little of our MSW currently to landfills in the Northeast, a lot of the states in the Northeast do, and we will soon be competing with them for out-of-state landfill space. And I'll also note that this is not just a Northeast problem. Landfills across the country are diminishing in number. It's particularly pronounced in the Northeast, but we are seeing a situation across the nation where this trend is also apparent. A recent report that was done in 2020 suggested that the country as a whole may have about 18 years of landfill capacity remaining. So while we have that option now, in the future, it's going to be more costly and more scarce. And this chart just illuminates the change in tip fees over time. The blue line represents tip fees specifically set by MIRA for MIRA municipalities. And the orange line is an estimate of average tip fees overall for municipalities across the state. The Mira tip fees were taken directly from the public documents available from their website. For the orange line, DEEP is required to review municipal service agreements from municipalities when they enter agreements to manage their waste. And this estimation is based on actual information from those MSAs, including out through 2026. Some contracts that were signed, for example, in the last year or two are for 4 or 5 years, and they provide specific tip fee information through the year 2026. So we were able to estimate on about 15 executed MSAs that we have. And I'll note that a couple of those MSAs encompass multiple towns, upwards of 10 or 12 towns. So we feel that this is a fairly representative picture of the current state of the state in terms of tip fees. I just wanted to remind the group also about the 2016 Comprehensive Materials Management Strategy, or the CMMS. The CMMS was an iteration of the mandated solid waste management plan that the state must produce from time to time. The 2016 CMMS was based on the state's statutory waste hierarchy, which you can see on the right. And this is described specifically in Connecticut General Statutes 22A-228, subsection B. At the top, the first priority is source reduction, followed by recycling and composting and bulky waste recycling. And at the bottom are waste to energy and landfill. And notably, waste to energy is more preferable than landfilling, which drives our desire for self-sufficiency and has driven policy over the last several decades. So the CMMS had 3 major goals, which I wrote out on the left: improve the performance of municipal recycling programs and reduce waste, including increasing participation and compliance with mandatory recycling provisions, develop and improve recycling and waste conversion technologies like anaerobic digestion, encourage corporations that design, produce, and market products to share responsibility for stewarding those materials in an environmentally sustainable manner, also known as EPR for packaging. And just a reminder that this comprehensive materials management strategy is the plan for materials management for the state. So DEEP has taken a number of actions since that document was released to adhere to that plan. Significantly, DEEP initially joined with over 70 municipalities. That number is now over 100 to form the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management in the fall of 2020. Since the CMMS prioritized working with municipalities, we found this exercise incredibly valuable to talk directly with town leaders on how to improve recycling in their communities. 4 working groups were established to focus on specific areas of interest, including extended producer responsibility, food scraps and organics collection and diversion, increased reuse and recycling, and unit-based pricing. So in December of 2020, the CCSMM released a menu of options for the department, the legislature, and municipalities to act upon based on what was appropriate for their specific community or their agency. And many of those actions listed in the menu have been implemented. Thinking legislatively, in particular, EPR for gas cylinders was a key component, and also the legislature has provided grant dollars for the Sustainable Materials Management Grant Program, which I will get into, to provide municipalities with some options for setting up organics collection and diversion programs. So in terms of what we've been doing around food waste, we actually have permitted capacity to accept up to an estimated 328,000 tons of food waste. Now, that number may sound high, and that's for a few reasons. First of all, some existing facilities like Bright Feeds, which is a brand new facility in Berlin that takes food waste and converts it to animal feed, they're still scaling up their operations. So they themselves essentially doubled our previous food waste capacity. But they're still scaling up, and we expect that they will be fully operational in time. Some existing facilities like the Quantum Biopower anaerobic digestion facility in Southington currently accept a lot of out-of-state food waste. Their permanent capacity is 112,000 tons per year. They received about 18,000 tons of Connecticut generated food waste in 2021, and the bulk of what they received was out of state. So there is some capacity there, and again, they're also not operating at full capacity, even accounting for the out-of-state food waste. And the other existing facilities, for example, on farm anaerobic digesters or others, are also permitted to take other types of organic waste, such as farm and animal waste, mixed yard waste, or ground clean wood, and they currently take little to no food waste. So I think the point here is that there is some capacity, but we need to provide these facilities with the feedstock and wait for them to get up and fully operational. And lastly, DEEP is continuing to increase and streamline permitting opportunities for the development of food waste collection and processing locations. We're looking at existing permitting programs and incorporating food waste collection and processing into those programs. And that was certainly a big point of discussion at the CCSMM, and we're implementing those changes in practice. And I previously mentioned the SMM grant program. And again, thank you to the legislature for very generously providing $10 million over the past 2 years for this program. The first round of grants was awarded in October of this year to 15 towns. That was nearly $5 million worth of grants that were awarded. These grants will provide financial and technical assistance for startup costs and implementation of food waste collection pilot programs, with some of those programs combined with unit-based pricing programs. And the intent is for these programs to become scalable so that they can be implemented town-wide and replicated elsewhere throughout the state. Some of the pilot programs were for neighborhoods or smaller communities, and some, in fact, were town-wide. So we'll get some great information from these pilot programs to understand better how food waste collection and diversion can be implemented at scale. And notably, the legislature also provided for a recurring funding source for an SMM account that can be used for future grant rounds. So $10 million is not the end of this. There will be more opportunity to provide future grant rounds and other potential avenues for improving organic collection throughout the state. So I also wanted to make sure that folks knew that DEEP is currently drafting an amendment to the 2016 CMS that further explains the self-sufficiency deficit that I have outlined today and details some strategies on how to address it. Again, it's prioritizing maximizing the diversion strategies that were previously outlined in the 2016 plan, including EPR for packaging and increased food waste diversion. It will also lay out some self-sufficiency scenarios based on the level of implementation and success of diversion strategies. And we plan to put out a draft for public comment and input in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that. So just general conclusions. As I said before, Connecticut generates about 2.2 million tons per year of MSW that's disposed either in RRFs or out-of-state landfills. With the closure of the Mira RRF, there's approximately a 1.3 to 1.4 million ton per year remaining practical capacity at Connecticut RRFs. So that creates that self-sufficiency deficit of managing disposed waste in state. Without Mira, we're expecting we'll be shipping approximately 40% of our MSW for disposal out of state. And of course, there are significant opportunities to ramp up diversion to close this deficit. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and we've got a few folks from the team to be able to assist me in answering any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, James, for the presentation. And if folks have questions, just raise your hand and I'll call on you while we're waiting for that. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. You said that about 328,000 tons of food waste are permitted right now in terms of being able to have capacity to divert food waste. Is that, when you say permitted, are all of these operational right now? Because I know that DEEP had previously permitted facilities that are not in existence.
Yes, that is accounting for facilities that are currently operational. Again, Bright Feeds, for example, is still scaling up their operations, but those are specific to operational facilities.
Okay, so it's about less than half of what we generate in food waste, correct?
It's a little more than half. in 2021, food waste generation was a little under 500,000 tons.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
again, some of
Right.
those facilities are permitted to take other types of organic waste, not just food waste. So we did our best to estimate, what the food potential food waste capacity is. So I just want to stress that that's an estimation; it's not exact. And we measure, some of the facilities are based on tons per day. And so we did our best to extrapolate, based on the number of operational days per year, what those numbers would be. So I want to stress that that's an estimate and not actual numbers.
Okay, and then you talked about the landfill capacity, and is that landfill capacity as we know the landfill landscape currently? Because I know that there's a lot of talk about sort of the landscape changing with respect to landfills. I'm assuming because capacity will be scarce over the next 18 years.
Yes, that's based on, it was based on an October of 2020 presentation that was made to the department and through CCSMM. And I know the data was sourced from various state agencies in the Northeast based on the estimations at the time. So the landscape could very well shift, but that's the best information that we have at this point in time in terms of known capacity and known future capacity.
Okay, and one last question is, Frank, I see you have your hand up, but in terms of weight, we talked about tip fees, which is obviously based on tonnage. In terms of weight in the waste stream, what accounts for the largest amount of weight?
In the waste stream?
Mm-hmm.
Again, harkening back to the pie chart, it's paper and food waste. Those are the two biggest pieces of the MSW waste stream.
And that's based on weight?
That's based on weight, yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. All right, Frank, you're up.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, James, for all the presentations. A lot of good stuff in here. The first chart that you showed that showed the raw MSW data. What were the real numbers? I saw it's kind of hard to distinguish what the 2012 number was. Can you provide that?
Yeah, if you don't mind giving me a moment to pull it up, I can grab it for you.
Yeah, if we could look at 12 and I guess the last 2 years, 20 and 21 maybe.
Yeah, so in 2012, the number was 2,460,000 approximately. In 2020, it was just shy of 2.2. And in 2021, it was 2.16. I will say the 2012 number was far higher than the others. I'm not sure if it's an outlier for that reason, but generally it's been going up and down between 2.3 and 2.2 or so. You're right that 2021 number is lower than the rest.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense from our experience in running transfer stations and dealing with MSW volumes with many municipalities. We're seeing a decrease between 1 to 3% annually over a long term. I think that's what you're seeing in the 10-year period from 12 to 21, and I think it'll continue. So when you make the amendment to the CMMS, I know past amendments or past CMMS plans, I don't know the right acronym, excuse me, the Solid Waste Management Plan. Previously, the department has used historical trends and data to extrapolate future tonnages, which used to look like a rising MSW generation rate. I think what we're seeing now is that that's actually decreasing. I think that's a nationwide phenomena too, that we're seeing a 1 to 3% annual decrease in MSW generation. Does the department plan to use that trend line to continue to extrapolate into the future as you're looking at that amendment?
Yeah, I think one of the challenging things right now, Frank, is that we have data from 2020 and 2021, which obviously the COVID pandemic has upended society globally, and while we have not seen any significant changes, thinking about the Wisconsin waste characterization study that was done, I think it's hard to extrapolate where things are going. I would So I think what we're focusing on, is the very near future, particularly in light of the closure of the Mira facility. So that's the real focus of the amendment. We know that the landscape is changing drastically because of the July closure, and we want to look to the near term on how to address that.
But so in the near future, it'd be fair to say that the department doesn't see MSW generation growing.
I think that's fair to say.
Thank you. And will the department make all the raw data for these graphs public? For at least the task force members?
We can certainly do that.
Okay. I think that would be appreciated. I know and I think the senator brought it up about the out-of-state capacity. The graph that you showed, I think, included Northeast states that none of which, I mean, maybe New York on a very small scale, that the state currently uses to export waste to. Have you done a similar type exercise to the states that we actually do export waste to?
We don't have that data on hand at this moment, but I think the point is that the other Northeast states do currently utilize landfill space in the Northeast. Maine, for example, is a prime example of that. And we know that we will be competing with those states as landfill capacity reduces in the near future. So the places we're currently using, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, et cetera, we know that we'll soon have more competitors for those spaces.
Okay, yeah, I think it's just a bit misleading if we're talking about capacity in the other states. So I also one last question. I think 18 years of capacity remaining. Was that in the United States that you're citing for landfill capacity?
Yes, I could provide a link to the article and report that discussed that.
Yeah, because that's a number that I don't think is agreeable to what our experience is and what the industry's outlook on available spaces. In fact, I think you referenced that the number of landfills are decreasing. Well, I think that's true. I think it's a similar thing that happened in the state of Connecticut. Every municipality used to have a landfill, the local town dump, and thankfully, those were probably the worst run facilities. What happened, those slowly closed and the larger landfills have taken place of those. So I think, speaking from the industry perspective, the number of landfills may be falling, but the capacity at the larger landfills continues to grow. We've seen that in some Ohio landfills getting expansions in Pennsylvania as well recently. So I think you have to look at both sides. If you want a full picture, you really got to look at it from both sides of the coin. So make that, and with a parting comment, would you be able to layer on top of your tip fee graph what Mira's projected tip fees were for those towns when they were on those years that you laid out for the existing contracts?
Projected from the most recent discussions or from the potential for redevelopment?
Yeah, Mira laid out a scenario for all its member communities that gave a projected tip fees for the next several years. I think at least past the 2026 numbers that you're referencing that the municipalities are getting now. Could you layer on top of those projections at some point, provide that to the committee?
Sure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the data.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. I just want to note too, we're talking a lot about landfilling, certainly from an environmental perspective, science has sort of been telling us that that's not necessarily the avenue we want to take. I did mention that I think that there's been progress made in landfills, but I do wonder why with this knowledge, across the US, across the world, that landfills have traditionally been harmful to the environment, why there's such a small percentage going out, when we're exporting, why such a small percentage goes to resource recovery facilities as opposed to landfills? Is that just because there's no capacity at RRS?
I'm going to look to Gabrielle to see if she can provide some insight here.
No, Senator Cohen, I think it's a cost differential. So it may be less expensive to go to a landfill and therefore preferred in instances where there may not be capacity closer for RRFs, because many of the RRFs are at or close to capacity that are that we would call regional. But then there are other business decisions that are made by the generators or the municipalities that that oversee the management of waste for their residents in looking for the least expensive option.
Okay. Potentially costly to the environment, but okay. Just a side note. I see my esteemed colleague, Senator Needleman, and co-chair of the Solid Waste Management Task Force has his hand up. Welcome, Senator.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator. It's very rare that somebody calls me esteemed, but thank you for that. Makes me feel good at whatever time it is this morning. And I do apologize for being late. The only thing I take exception to Frank having said is that the landfills, the dumps in towns were poorly run and They're the source of a lot of community activity, run well or not. So a lot of people still love having at least the social part of the town transfer station. But he is right. There is a lack of control, or had been a lack of control on what went in the ground. James, thank you for the presentation, and I would appreciate you sharing that certainly with the committee. And just a couple of broad view questions based on all the knowledge, and I had spoken to the commissioner about this in one of earlier public hearings. It still appears that based on what we know in the moment, even with some of the more sophisticated landfilling capabilities, burning and converting to energy is still the most environmentally, the least objectionable way to deal with whatever is left after we divert, recycle, all the things that we want to do. Is that correct? Is that the position of the department?
That's what the statute says, Senator Needleman, in terms of the statutory waste hierarchy. You're right that it first prioritizes source reduction, recycling, and composting. Obviously, those are the preferable strategies, but waste energy is preferred over landfilling and straight incineration.
So, and thank you. I just, that's my understanding. Has there been any conversation there? Because I've seen all the articles that Senator Cohen has referenced where some of the more advanced landfilling techniques are less objectionable. Obviously, one of the issues always is everything you put in the ground. You can't check every ton of waste. And we know that there have been a lot of really bad things put in the ground. Now, lining the landfills and stuff certainly improves it, but there's still the issue of capturing the methane from the degradation is always going to be a challenge in a large landfill. So have you guys stayed abreast of all the current information?
I'm going to turn it to others from the team who may have more knowledge about this.
Yeah, so a lot of the local, thank you, Congressman Needleman.
Congressman, oh
Sorry,
my God.
Senator Needleman.
Oh, so I'm on my way to Washington in 20 minutes.
My apologies. So
right.
A lot of the local landfills that were in existence through to the 70s or so, late 70s, were unlined. Truly, they were dumps. There was just a hole in the ground that people went to and threw stuff in. And yes, there was definitely a social aspect to it, as I've heard stories. But the The reason for their closure was because of the EPA regulations regarding the management, the appropriate environmentally based management of landfills. And in order for them to continue, they would have had to have had significant capital investments in terms of being able to monitor different potential environmental impacts. So a lot of them shut down specifically because of the EPA requirements with respect to landfill management. And it was during that time that the conversation was turned to alternate disposal methods, and ultimately why the legislature determined that an investigation or an evaluation of waste to energy capacity being established in Connecticut was, was the way to go. So in terms of current issues, I think we're all very aware that as science evolves, we find new and more problematic contaminants, constituents within our waste stream that has to be then evaluated in terms of the technology that's available to, one, identify the concentrations, identify the frequency of that material being in the waste streams, and then on top of that, how to detect and then how to manage environment in an environmentally responsible way. These are challenges no matter what technology is being used. I just want to make that clear, but the challenges are different depending on the management method. So I just wanted to make sure that
No, I do
that
understand
was
the
yeah.
specific,
Yeah.
the obvious
Yes.
one. Senator Cohen is very familiar with this PFAS.
right.
We're measuring down into the parts per trillion now.
Correct.
We don't really know what
Correct.
the impact on public health is
Right.
at that level, but we are beginning to get concerned
Yep.
that PFAS as a specific case is
Yes.
problematic because it's a forever ingredient. And,
Yeah.
and
The one
I haven't looked into what the liners in the landfills are and what the lifespan of those are versus the degradation of the, component material that you put into the landfill. But I just really believe that it's important that we, the committee, the public, the legislature understands that from our perspective, nothing has really changed in terms of our vision for what to do with what's left. The least in the ground possible. But then again, there are certainly, as we all know, pretty significant environmental impacts of burning or garbage is like energy. There's no easy solution here. And human beings, by virtue of who we are and how we've evolved, create garbage. Now, society has made us create more per capita per year, I suspect. But I think Frank's point is an important one, that the trend seems to be flat to slightly down based on a flat to slightly down population. So I'm not sure it's gotten that much worse per person. Has it?
Well, I don't know that 1.3% decrease over the course of a handful of years or maybe 2 years is statistically significant.
I agree.
Generally, scientifically speaking, you're talking about a plus or minus 5%, not necessarily being statistically significant. So I don't know that I would hang a lot of potential on that small a decrease. I think it remains to be seen what the trend becomes, because COVID totally upended our society, our buying practices, our consumer practices, et cetera. So I think we need a few more years to see how things level out before we can make decisions based on that small a deviation in terms of generation. Anything's possible. I'm not saying it's going to trend up, and I think we have to wait and see. The one
I
other,
agree with you. And it,
Yeah.
Certainly being involved in the packaging world myself, I understand what unit packaging, smaller size of everything has led to.
right.
I had the opportunity yesterday to visit All Waste recycling plant. It's very, very impressive. We are able to do more in the recycling world now. But what I don't think, because my own presumption would have been based on, buying things one at a time and having them shipped. There's certainly an environmental impact to that, but it doesn't seem as yet to have demonstrated an explosion in tonnage of municipal solid waste, and more importantly, non-recyclable municipal solid waste. So I just want to go back to a couple of other sort of high-level questions here. The chart about the age of the waste to energy plants is really important. I've long believed that when the energy prices had collapsed and the tipping fees were really, really constrained, it wasn't only Mira that had issues with making major capital improvements to their facilities. They all did. In some regard, there might be a little bit of a lesson there between the private sector versus the public, quasi-public, and how they made investments and how they didn't. I long looked at Mira as a Mira town, by the way, as the first selectman. Mira sort of kept the lid on tipping fees, which in some regard may or may not have helped this scenario, right? The towns fight for every nickel, and a 50 cent per ton rise, was catastrophic for every town's budget. And that sort of suppressed that. The collapse in the price of the value of the energy certainly had an impact on the capital investments. And I'm concerned that all of these plants are sort of in that aging out period. And I'm also of the very strong belief that whatever method we choose, we have been, on a path of being self-sustaining for a long time. And I think that is still the goal of the state. And more a question directed to James. I think that we want to figure out how to solve our own problem, and whatever the solution, if it's landfilling, if it's burning, if it's some other form of processing what's left, we really want to be responsible for what we generate. Is that correct, James?
Yes, that's still our philosophy. That's what the 2016 CMMS was asking of the state to continue to strive for self-sufficiency. And I think that's why we see significant opportunity, particularly in food waste and improving the recycling sector. You saw the chart where there's still a significant portion of recyclables that are ending up in the MSW stream and not even making their way to a MRF. There's a lot of work we can do, and including that big piece of the pie that is stuff that's going in the trash that is that could be recoverable if it were source separated, or could be recoverable if technologies were improved. I know I want to give Frank a little shout out here, because his new facility, at least early indications seem to be that they're able to separate out black plastic material, which a lot of other facilities are not able to. So that's an example of a way we could kind of improve the system further. So self-sufficiency, clearly still the goal. I think we have a lot of room for improvement in food scraps and recycling, and that's but we still have a 40% self-sufficiency gap estimated with the Mira closure.
And optimizing waste diversion, optimizing waste reduction, optimizing recycling, looking out over the next 10 or 20 years with the aging of the existing facilities, we have to do something. And I'm one of those guys, I think this, that believes that the free market here plays a very important role in what we do, and we play a very important role in setting the goals and objectives for the state. That's the whole purpose behind forming this group. And certainly I applaud all the work that DEEP has been trying to do in the areas of waste reduction, waste diversion. I'm not sure I agree with all of it, but I think that they're all important places that we should be looking. I don't know ultimately how much, of the total potential diversion reduction that we can do, what we'll actually ever achieve. Certainly in my lifetime, probably less than in your lifetime, but we should be on that path to working to doing that, but we still have a gap. And if we're not careful, the gap could get bigger. And I think, again, that's because these plants may or may not stay viable for the long term. We need these operations to be improved, not maintained as they are. There are new technologies that, and again, this part of this whole working group. So I'm trying to think in a big picture, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but part of the reason for this working group is to come up with a plan, a vision, and guardrails for an industry that needs our help in terms of setting direction, maybe some support, maybe valuing energy, maybe having another public option out there that keeps the private sector a little bit honest. I don't know. I mean, that's one of the questions that has been in my mind, but we will be needing to work with DEEP and the industry to come up with a broad set of goals and objectives so that, one, this problem doesn't get worse. And I don't want to refer to anything that we're doing as sort of nipping around the edges here, because we're doing a lot more than that. But I am concerned that a long-term strategy for sustaining and improving what we already have and reducing the waste stream as much as possible, as much as practically possible, and as much as is affordably possible. I have some concerns about some of the diversion ideas and what the actual cost when you take out the grants and, long-term, what the per ton cost is going to be. How do you value the energy that comes out of the waste diversion and anaerobic digesting component? How do you make all these numbers work without either burying the rate payer or burying every consumer in the state? And my deep-seated big fear is here, if we do policy incorrectly, we're going to disproportionately affect the people who can least afford it. That's my real underlying big fear here. We need to be looking at the big picture and working down to the small. And part of me thinks that we've been working from the small up. So I'm open to any comments or suggestions that you have. And I've certainly spent enough time with the commissioner on this. But I think we have to have a holistic approach to solid waste management here. We have goals, but what is the role of legislation here? What can we do to incentivize this market to, meet our goals, provide guardrails environmentally, cost-wise on the market itself, and not overwhelm the towns, the residents, and those least able to pay for our goals and desires. So I know you've been sort of noodling around this area since you've left the legislature, and I appreciate your involvement. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, first, Senator, I would encourage you to take a look at the 2016 CMMS, because that provides our high level, large scale vision for the state of materials management and where we think we could go. And certainly the amendment that we are working on will address some of the questions that you're asking. I'd also say, in terms of looking to market-based mechanisms for some solutions here, I think we agree and see EPR for packaging as a really viable market-based mechanism, ensuring that improvements in the recycling system are done at the most cost-efficient manner possible, and putting kind of the onus back on the market to come up with solutions. So we certainly agree that there are options there. I think that we ultimately we see a lot of potential, and I think see the ability to really scale up some of the things that we've outlined in the CMMS, like recycling and food waste collection. So I think we may disagree a little bit there about the scale of practicality. But I'd urge you to take another look at the 2016 CMMS, because I think it really lays out our overall policy direction. And I'd also defer to others if they want to weigh in.
I'll wait to hear if anybody else has any comments. There being none. I think anytime you're working on changing human behavior, right, you have a long road to get to the other side. You know, recycling has been going on for a long time, and certainly single stream has made it a lot more consumer friendly, more friendly for the people who are looking to do it. It's less than perfect, but I think in Connecticut, we do a pretty good job of recycling. My concern about getting into the nitty gritty, and I said this to the commissioner the other day, there are certain things in Connecticut that I think we should just outright ban. But when you get into EPR state by state, it's very, very similar to GMO labeling. People who produce products cannot do that state by state. And more importantly, Connecticut is a very small state. So, you know, having a West Coast and East Coast initiative on stuff like this, when there are national and North American and global suppliers for components, becomes problematic. So some of the ideas, I think, work better from the national level on down. They make it a lot easier. But I'm a firm believer that certain products should not be introduced into the waste stream. They're not going to be recyclable. When you burn them, they're not healthy for people to breathe. There's just a lot of issues with them. One of them would be expanded, you know, polystyrene foam, for example. I don't think that that's something that we really want to have out there, but that's just an opinion. I appreciate the plan, but I'm not sure that the plan actually adds up to we've solved the problem for the next 25 years. And I guess that's one of the reasons for forming this group was, let's take a look at the 25-year outlook, aging plants, technologies that are evolving, and, you know, a desire on the part of some people to get to zero waste, a desire on the part of others to figure out how to better manage the waste that we have. And I'm not convinced that we're there yet. And I think that's the data you have is helpful, and I'm glad that you're going to share that. But I think that there's a lot more work to be done here, and certainly the failure, the shutdown of the Mira plant has brought this to the forefront. That would be Senator Looney. I'm going to jump off this for a moment. I'm going to end with that. Thank you. All right, James.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator. And I want to be careful about speculating too much, because there's a lot of work that's still to be done of this, solid waste management working group, as well as the subcommittee, and really delving deeper. I think we need to delve deeper into, this was a really great broad overview, but I think we need to delve deeper into food waste diversion, potential EPR, all of the things that, you mentioned CCSMM, having these subgroups. I think, we're really going to need to, as a subgroup, delve deeper into each of these topics. This is just our first meeting. And I'm really grateful that you've provided us with an overview, but I'm really trying to come to the table here, and I hope other members of the subgroup are as well, with an open mind about how we might tackle this waste management crisis. I see my other esteemed colleague, Representative Gresco, who is the co-chair of the environment, as well as the co-chair of the broader working group, has a question. Representative, good to see you.
Thank you, Senator. I apologize for coming from the dark side of the moon here, but I'm having blind issues here, so you have to excuse me. I'll make it quick. James, we look forward to seeing the proposed diversion legislation from deep in the 2023 session. The January agenda for the subgroup that I am chairing will have a modern, more modern landfill kind of idea that they will explain. So if anyone is interested in that, it would be January 12th going forward. That will be on the agenda for us. And then lastly, if you haven't had a chance to go out to the Murphy Road recycling, I would anticipate another trip. I had the education yesterday of walking through the plant, and we will be making that available to another tour for all of the Environment Committee members and anybody else who wants to come and tour the plant, which is very, as I said, educational. So thank you, Senator, for the time, and look forward to continue working on this.
Great, thanks, Representative. And I see Jennifer Heaton-Jones has her hand raised. Hi, Jen.
Hi, how are you? So I'm coming from the municipal perspective, and I would say I just know ultimately most disposal contracts do come from the municipalities, and cost is a driving force. So I think it's important we do get some kind of direction from what municipalities would support for disposal options into the future. There isn't one solution, as Representative Needleman had sort of alluded to, and we have multiple streams, so I think we're going to have ultimately multiple solutions with that. And we're not the only state that has really struggled with this subject and these concerns, and I think we should maybe perhaps look beyond our borders and see how other states have managed their own crisis. And I'm also curious to understand a little bit more about the landfill data in order to have a better understanding. I actually am wondering if we can even implore Frank to sort of help support that in that data, given his expertise and his industry knowledge. I don't think we can make good decisions without good data and understanding. And I think also, I hope that we will look at some of the great examples that are happening in the state now regionally, and looking at how we can perhaps come up with solutions that are more in smaller areas, regional areas, like we've done in the HRA region for organics, where we are managing organic waste within our own communities, reducing the cost of hauling, transportation, and disposal. And I think that should be also considered. Certainly, we are addressing residential organics, but it's a huge piece of the waste stream. So I'm just, again, coming from a municipal perspective, but I do have some concerns about how the municipalities, the chief elected officials, will look at the disposal options, and how will they embrace them, considering there are concerns regarding long-term liability with landfills. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate that perspective. And as you mentioned, if anybody has data, and Frank, you mentioned the landfill data, if you're willing or have that data available to you, or anybody has data that is pertinent to this group, if you could send it to Gaia McDermott, and she can make sure it's disseminated to this subgroup of the greater, solid waste management working group. So I want to thank you all for attending. We've gone over, we shoot for an hour, knowing we'll probably go to an hour and a half. So considering that we're finishing up before 11:30, I consider that a success. It was really great to get this overview from you, James, and all the folks at DEEP who worked hard on that, and appreciate that so much. And we will be discussing what the content will be for our next meeting, as well as a date. So look for a future email. And